What do you think you're doing just kneeling there? He snapped. Adrian Cole's voice ripped through the cramped room like a struck match in a dark theater. The syllables bounced off the thin plaster walls, shattering the quiet the way only a man used to being obeyed could. He hadn't meant to come here. He was supposed to stride into his executive study 5 doors down, the one that smelled like leather and cedar and old money. But with a phone wedged between his shoulder and ear, a steaming espresso in one hand, and a mind already in 3 different meetings, he had opened the wrong door and stepped straight into something he neither understood nor knew how to tolerate. The black woman in the plain navy uniform flinched, but she did not rise. She stayed on her knees by the narrow window, fingers laced together so tightly her knuckles had gone pale, lips moving in a whisper that had clearly been peaceful seconds ago. Morning light spilled over her shoulders, turning her deep brown skin into warm bronze and making the tiny room look almost sacred. Adrian froze in the doorway, caught between disbelief and irritation. He took it in with a single trained sweep. The cracked glass pane, the worn Bible open on the sill, the neatly made bed, the shoes lined up with military precision. Behind the woman, his own reflection shimmered faintly in the window. Charcoal suit, platinum watch, controlled jaw, gray eyes that had learned long ago to stay cold. 2 worlds colliding in a space barely big enough for one. Then the anger came back, familiar, safe, a shield he knew how to use. "Did I start paying you to mutter in dark corners?" he barked, stepping fully into the room. "Does this look like a church to you?" The woman's hands tightened, but her voice stayed soft. "I'm sorry, sir." Her name floated up from some HR form he'd skimmed once and forgotten. Lila Brooks, 31, domestic staff. Background check clean. Dependents, 1 son. "What exactly," Adrian pressed, each word clipped, "are you apologizing for?" "I was just praying," she whispered. "For what?" His laugh came out sharp and humorless. "For my stock price? For the carpet?" He gestured at the faded rug beneath her knees. "Maybe you should pray you don't lose your job." She swallowed. He saw her throat move, saw the tremor in her shoulders. Still, she didn't look away. "No, sir," Lila said. "I was praying for your family." The sentence landed like a thrown stone. "My family?" Adrian repeated, brows lifting in disbelief. "You don't even know them." "I pray for this house," she said quietly. "For everyone who lives in it. For peace." Her gaze flicked to his for the briefest second. "For you." That was the wrong answer. Adrian stepped closer, shoes sinking into the old carpet, the scent of cleaning products and something faintly floral mixing with his cologne. He knew this feeling, heat rising in his chest, the old contempt he'd nursed for anything that smelled like superstition. "You pray for me?" he scoffed. "You really think I need your help? You think some invisible God gives a damn what happens under this roof?" "I believe he does," Lila replied, barely above a whisper. The word believe scraped at something raw inside him. He'd spent his life dismantling illusions. Religion, fate, mercy, all the soft lies people told themselves to survive a brutal world. He'd watched doctors fail, watched machines flatline, watched a hospital chapel stay empty while the ICU filled with bodies. He'd done the math. "Let me make this simple," he said through his teeth. "You don't get paid to believe. You get paid to work." She nodded, a small tremor running through her body. "Yes, sir." "Then get up." Lila tried to stand. Her knees shook beneath her, the hem of her uniform brushing the wooden floor. The light shifted, catching on the single tear that had escaped down her cheek. Adrian watched it fall, an absurd, annoying detail, and felt something twist painfully in his gut. He stepped closer, needing to reassert control, to prove, if only to himself, that he still ruled this house, this world. "Next time you want to pray," he sneered, "do it on your own time. Not in my home. Not under my roof." His hand shot out, pointing at her more aggressively than he meant to. "Do you hear me?" She instinctively backed away. Her shoulders hit the open window. For one terrifying heartbeat, the worn rug betrayed her. The heel of her shoe slipped on its frayed edge. Her hand flailed for the frame. The curtain fluttered. The world slowed to a thick, suffocating silence. Adrian lunged forward without thinking. His fingers closed around her forearms, strong and desperate, dragging her away from the drop beyond the second-story window. Her body jerked toward him, her breath catching in a sharp gasp. For a brief, startling moment, they were close enough that he could feel the frantic pulse beneath her skin, see the fear in her eyes, hear his own heart pounding in his ears. He hadn't meant to push her, but he'd certainly not meant to almost let her fall either. Guilt knifed through the anger, ugly, unfamiliar. He released her slowly, as if his hand had burned itself on contact. Lila steadied herself, one palm still flat against the wall, chest rising and falling too quickly. I'm sorry, sir, she managed. I didn't mean to upset you. Upset him. He stared at her, words jammed in his throat. Her hands trembled. Her face had gone pale beneath the sunlight. And still there was no bitterness in her expression, no accusation, only grace. I was praying for your peace, she whispered. He couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand her calm after his fury. Couldn't stand the way the sentence lodged itself somewhere behind his ribs. Adrian turned toward the door, jaw locked. Get back to work, he muttered, voice abruptly low. Now! He didn't wait to see if she obeyed. He yanked the door open and slammed it behind him, the echo chasing him down the corridor like an accusation he couldn't outrun. By the time he reached his study, his hand hurt from gripping the handle too tightly. His heart still hadn't settled. He poured himself a drink he didn't need. The whiskey burned all the way down, but the shame didn't dissolve. He paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the manicured lawns curve away like a magazine ad. The world outside looked perfectly designed as it was. Everything under control. Everything except that one small room he'd never bothered to notice. The servants' quarters. Her room. He could see it in his head with disturbing clarity. The worn Bible, the cracked window, the simple bed waiting to be remade at the end of a 14-hour shift. And in the middle of it all, a woman on her knees, asking heaven for peace he hadn't believed in since he was 39 years old, and a doctor had said, "There's nothing more we can do." "For my peace," he repeated under his breath, almost mocking himself. What peace? Adrian Cole didn't believe in God. He believed in numbers, projections, systems, in signing his name on deeds and contracts that bent reality in his favor. Miracles were for people with no leverage. So why, he wondered bitterly, did that morning feel more like a miracle than any quarterly earnings report he'd ever framed? He stared down at the amber liquid in his glass. For a second, the reflection in it wasn't his. It was hers. Eyes shining, not from fear, but from something steadier. Something that looked an awful lot like forgiveness. He set the glass down too hard. The ice rattled. Ridiculous, he muttered. But that night, when he lay in his king-size bed, under 1,000 thread-count sheets, staring at the ceiling while the house creaked and sighed around him, he didn't think about mergers or pending legislation. He thought about a woman almost tipping backward out of his window. He thought about sunlight catching her like a halo. He thought about the fact that he had grabbed her without hesitation, and that somehow, some part of him had been more afraid of losing her than of being sued. He told himself he wouldn't think about it again, that in the morning this would be just one more irritation filed away under staff issues. But deep down he already knew he was lying to himself. If you've ever had one moment that refused to leave your mind, no matter how hard you tried to bury it, you know exactly where Adrian was that night. He didn't sleep. Not really. The old grandfather clock in the hall marked the passing hours with soft, relentless chimes. Pipes groaned. The heating system hummed. The kind of background noises he'd tuned out years ago now felt deafening. And beneath it all, like a stubborn melody, was the memory of Lila's voice. I was praying for your peace, for your family. He hadn't spoken to his own daughter in 8 months. She was in Los Angeles, directing indie films he pretended not to watch, but secretly funded from shadow accounts. She'd told him once she didn't recognize the man he'd become after her mother died. He told her work came first. Both sentences had cut too deep to take back. That was his family now, a framed photograph on the landing, a trust fund managed by lawyers, and a grown child choosing scripts over Sunday dinners. Who exactly did this maid think she was praying for? Morning came gray and thin. Adrian was already standing at the window when the first staff car rolled through the gates. He watched people spill out in black and white uniforms, disappearing into side entrances like stagehands entering through backstage doors. Then he saw her. Lila crossed the back terrace carrying a metal tray of polished cutlery, shoulders straight, steps measured. There was no sign of yesterday in her movements. No flinch, no hesitation. She moved like a professional, like someone who had learned long ago how to carry wounds where no one could see them. He told himself he'd avoid her. Instead, 20 minutes later, he found himself at the foot of the main staircase just as she came out of the dining room with an empty coffee pot in hand. They nearly collided. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said, steady, respectful. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and she smiled. Not wide, not flirtatious, just a small, gentle curve at the corner of her mouth. The kind of smile that said, "I'm not your enemy." Something in his chest cracked. He didn't answer. He just stepped aside and let her pass, annoyed with himself for noticing how the sunlight followed her across the marble floor. By noon, he had checked the surveillance monitors twice. Not for security, for her. He caught her folding linens in the laundry room, movements precise, almost meditative. Saw her later wiping down the patio table, pausing just once to tilt her face toward the sky, as if checking whether the light still remembered her name. It made no sense. The more he watched, the more irritated he became. At mid-afternoon, he walked the house himself, an old habit from his early years of building everything from scratch. He passed the portraits of industrialists and scientists he'd hung as his personal pantheon. Men who believed in facts, not feelings. Men whose biographies had convinced him that greatness and softness couldn't occupy the same body. He ended up, without meaning to, in the servants' corridor, outside her door. It was closed now. The cheap white paint was slightly scuffed where people had brushed past with laundry baskets. He leaned his shoulder against the opposite wall, arms folded, telling himself he had simply walked too far and stopped here by accident. Then he heard it. Her voice, muffled through the wood, too soft for words to separate, but unmistakable in tone. She was praying again, not wailing, not begging, just speaking with a kind of quiet reverence that made the narrow hallway feel suddenly too small. He didn't move, didn't interrupt. For the first time in years, Adrian Cole listened to a prayer he insisted he didn't believe in. And something about the cadence of it made it hard to breathe. He left before she could open the door and catch him there like a thief. The next morning, he did something he never did. He arrived at breakfast early. The long mahogany table was set for one, his place at the head with perfect symmetry on either side. Staff moved around the edges of the room like choreography. No one ever sat with him. It was an unspoken rule, written not in ink but in the sharp looks of previous bosses. Lila entered carrying a bowl of fresh fruit. She set it at the other end of the table, as far from his chair as possible, and turned to go. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice sounding strange even to himself. She stopped mid-step. Yes, sir?" He gestured to the chair directly across from him. "Sit." Silence fell over the room. The chef froze in the doorway. The butler's eyebrows disappeared into his hairline. This was not done. Lila clutched the dish towel in her hands, eyes widening. "Sir, I said sit," Adrian repeated, not harshly this time, just firmly. After a moment's hesitation, she pulled the chair out and lowered herself onto it, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Her uniform looked almost out of place against the polished wood and bone china. He picked up his coffee cup to give his hands something to do. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. "Almost 11 months, sir." "And before that?" "I worked for a family in Savannah." Her voice had that same quiet steadiness, but he could hear something beneath it now, a current of weariness, of endurance. They moved away. "You left your own family behind to come here?" he asked. Her fingers tightened on the napkin. "My son lives with my aunt in Georgia. He's 11. "You pray for him too?" The question slipped out before he could catch it, coated in more sarcasm than he intended. Lila actually looked surprised. Then she nodded. "Every day." He studied her properly for the first time. She wasn't stunning in a magazine cover way. Her beauty was softer, rooted, like something built to last. The kind of face you remembered not because it demanded attention, but because it knew how to hold pain without letting it spill everywhere. "And you pray for me," he said. "Why?" She hesitated. He watched her weigh the risk of honesty against the safety of silence. "Because peace isn't something we're born with," she said finally. "Sometimes someone has to pray it into us." "You think I need peace?" "I think everyone does, Mr. Cole." The way she said his name, no flattery, no fear, unnerved him more than any investor's threat ever had. "You don't even know me," he muttered. Her gaze didn't waver. "I know what silence sounds like," she said softly. "This house has a lot of it." That landed like a punch. He set his cup down a little too hard. "You're bold for a maid." "I mean no disrespect," she replied quickly. "I only meant—" "I know what you meant," he cut in, but the edge had drained from his voice. The room felt suddenly too bright, too exposed. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had pointed at his life and called it lonely to his face. After a long pause, he said, "You may go." She stood, smoothed her apron, and left without another word. But her presence lingered like the after-image of staring directly at the sun. Later, on a conference call with 3 different continents holding their breath for his decision, Adrian found his attention drifting, not to charts, but to the faint sound of humming in the hallway. He stepped out. Lila was polishing the stair rail, humming some low, unfamiliar hymn under her breath. She stopped instantly when she saw him. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to make noise." He shook his head slowly. "It's fine." The word felt strange on his tongue. "You ever stop?" he asked. "Working or praying?" She replied, a hint of quiet humor flickering through her eyes. "Either." "No, sir." He almost smiled. "Almost. Must be exhausting." "It keeps me standing," she said simply. He didn't answer. He didn't know how. That night, long after the staff had retreated to their rooms and the mansion had settled into its curated silence, Adrian found himself walking the hallway to the servants' wing again. He stopped outside her door. From inside came that soft rustle of fabric, then the low rise and fall of her voice. Praying again. Not for show, not because anyone was watching, least of all him, but because it was who she was when no one asked anything of her. For the first time in a very long time, the billionaire at the top of the hill felt like an intruder in his own house. He didn't knock. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there in the dim corridor, hand resting lightly on the wall, listening to a woman he barely knew talk to a god he didn't believe in, and realizing with a dawning unease that the wrong door he'd opened that morning might have been the only right thing he'd done in years. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the logic and armor, something small and stubborn whispered, "This is where everything is going to change." Adrian Cole didn't sleep the next night either. He lay on his back with one arm draped over his eyes and silk sheets cool against skin that felt too hot, too tight. The house was quiet in the way only very rich houses could be. Air-conditioned, insulated, muffled. No car horns, no televisions through thin walls, no neighbors arguing on balconies. Just the soft tick of the antique clock on the landing. The occasional sigh of old pipes. The whisper of wind against glass. And beneath it all, the echo of a voice he couldn't seem to outrun. "I was praying for your peace." He rolled onto his side and glared at the faint light sneaking in around the edges of the curtains. Peace. The word felt like a joke in his mouth. Peace didn't pay dividends. Peace didn't negotiate contracts. Peace hadn't shown up in the hospital when his wife's lungs filled with fluid, and the ventilator did nothing but delay the inevitable. He had prayed once. It came back to him now, whether he wanted it or not. The smell of bleach and wilted flowers, the flicker of fluorescent bulbs. His hands clenched together so tightly his knuckles ached. He'd whispered a deal into the empty air above an ICU bed. Take anything. Take the houses, the jet, the company, just not her. No one answered. 3 days later, he signed the DNR himself. That was the last time he had allowed the word believe anywhere near his chest. And yet here he was, years later, heart pounding over a cleaning woman, whispering prayers in a room he hadn't known existed before yesterday. "This is absurd," he muttered into the dark. By the time the first weak light of dawn brushed the edges of the sky, he gave up on pretending. He dressed more slowly than usual, buttoning his shirt with hands that shook slightly from lack of sleep. then walked to the window and watched the estate wake up. Vans came through the service gate. Gardeners unloaded tools. A pastry delivery truck reversed with a soft beep. Then he saw her. Lila crossed the back patio with a basket of folded linens balanced against her hip. No trace of yesterday's near fall in her stride. No sign of resentment in the way she held herself. Just quiet efficiency, as if her world hadn't tilted at all when he'd nearly sent her tumbling backward out a second-story window. And for reasons he refused to analyze, a small, unwelcome relief slid through him. She was still here. He went downstairs later than usual, hoping to slip past the dining room entirely. Instead, he walked straight into routine. The long table set just so, his place at the head, the ritual he'd designed to keep everyone at the right distance. But something in him had shifted. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," Lila said as she set down a fresh bowl of berries. Her eyes met his. That same small, impossible smile. He surprised himself. "Sit," he heard himself say, nodding at the chair opposite his. Her brows rose. The butler standing near the doorway almost dropped the silver coffee pot. Staff never sat with him. That was more than a rule. It was a boundary, an electric fence everyone had learned to respect. "Sir, I should—" "Sit," Adrian repeated, gentler but no less firm. "You can go back to saving my carpets afterward." A flicker, was that amusement, touched her eyes. She pulled the chair out slowly and sat, smoothing her apron as though that might shield her from whatever this was. He didn't know how to do this. Small talk was for shareholders and journalists. But the silence stretched and his own curiosity had become an itch he couldn't ignore. "How old is your son?" he asked, reaching for his coffee. She blinked, startled. "Malik? He's 11. You left him with your aunt?" "Yes, sir." Her fingers twisted the napkin in her lap. "My aunt is steady. She's raised kids her whole life. I didn't want Malik bouncing around from job to job with me while I tried to find something stable." "So you came here," Adrian said, "to take care of another man's house instead." She didn't flinch at the barb. "This job feeds him, puts shoes on his feet, helps pay for his program at school." "What program?" "Advanced support," she said. "They say he's ahead in math, but he needs extra attention to stay challenged. The weekend classes aren't free." A small, rueful smile. "Nothing good ever is." He took that in, the note in her voice, the way she'd wrapped her pride in understatement. "And you pray for him?" he said. She nodded once. "Every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep." "And for me," he added, still trying to understand the part that bothered him most. "Why?" She studied him, really studied him, as if weighing how much truth he could handle. "Because some people walk around looking like they're carrying entire buildings on their shoulders," she said softly. "And if no one prays for them, they start to think that weight is all they deserve." He felt his jaw clench. "And you think I'm one of those people?" he asked. "I think you built a beautiful cage," Lila replied, "and you're the one locked inside it." The sentence sliced through him cleaner than any insult would have. "You're bold for someone on payroll," he said, but there was no venom left in it. "I'm honest," she corrected quietly, "and I still know where the mop closet is if you decide you don't like it." He almost laughed. The sound rose unfamiliar and rusty, and he pushed it down, unsettled by how much he wanted to let it out. "You may go," he said instead, "before I decide to fire you for insubordination." She stood. "Yes, sir." But as she turned, he caught that small, steady smile again, the one that suggested she wasn't afraid of him the way most people were. Not anymore. It bothered him all morning. He tried to bury himself in work. His assistant brought reports, forwarded emails, fired off talking points for an upcoming interview. Adrian nodded at the right places, signed where he was supposed to sign. But each time he set his pen down, his mind drifted back downstairs, to a room with a cracked window, to a boy named Malik, to a woman praying for everyone under his roof, including him, as if she actually believed it made a difference. By lunchtime, he gave up pretending. "Bring me the personnel files for everyone hired in the last 2 years," he told his assistant. "Everyone, sir? Everyone." The folder landed on his desk an hour later, thick, tabbed, impersonal. He flipped through without quite knowing what he was looking for until he found it. Brooks, Leela Celeste. He slid the single file free. Basic HR data stared back at him. Birth date, social security number, previous employers, emergency contact. A small photograph clipped to the corner. Her expression serious, unsmiling, like she hadn't expected the picture to matter to anyone. At the bottom of the form, beneath additional notes, in neat, careful handwriting, someone had written, reliable. Will work quietly. Grateful for the opportunity. His chest tightened. How many times had he skimmed files like this, reducing entire lives to bullet points and salary brackets? He'd move people like chess pieces across spreadsheets, never once wondering who they prayed for at night. He slid the file back into the folder, then didn't. Instead, he kept it on his desk a moment longer, fingers resting on the edge of the paper, as if it anchored him in a thought he didn't want but couldn't release. 30 minutes later, his phone lay on the desk in front of him, screen glowing with an open browser. He stared at the empty search bar as if it were a cliff edge. Then he typed, Malik Brooks Elementary School, Georgia. The results were messy. A list of districts and schools, a PTA page here, an outdated newsletter there. He clicked through until a grainy scan of a local bulletin stopped him cold. Student Spotlight. Malik B., grade 5. The photo quality was terrible, but he recognized the eyes. Bright. Focused. Standing in front of a science project made of cardboard and hope. The caption beneath it read, When I grow up, I want to teach. I like math because it makes broken pieces add up again. That last line. Adrian leaned back in his chair, throat tight. He found the school's number on the district's contact page and dialed before he could talk himself out of it. Good afternoon, Ridgeview Elementary, a woman answered. This is Principal Harris. Yes, he said, forcing his voice into its usual calm register. I'm calling about a student, Malik Brooks. A pause, the faint rustle of papers. May I ask who's calling? I'd prefer to remain anonymous, Adrian replied. I'm a friend of the family. The word felt foreign in his mouth. I wanted to inquire about his program fees. His Saturday enrichment classes? The principal asked. Her tone warmed. Malik is one of our brightest, always helping the other kids. We'd love to see him in the program more consistently, but... She stopped herself. But the fees, Adrian prompted. Mrs. Brooks has been making payments when she can, Principal Harris said carefully. There's a remaining balance, around $400 for the year. $400. He'd spent more than that on a bottle of wine last week and left half of it unfinished. Is there a way to settle that balance? He asked. Quietly? Yes, of course, we can record it as a private donation and credit it only to his account. Do that, Adrian said, and mark the rest of the year paid in full. If he needs supplies, calculators, whatever, add it. Understood, she replied. And your name, sir? For our records? He hesitated. The old part of him, the one used to seeing his name in plaques and programs, twitched. Just mark it as a friend, he said. He hung up before she could say thank you. He should have felt satisfied. Box ticked. Problem solved. He'd done something good and efficient, the way he handled everything else. But it didn't feel like closing a loop. It felt like opening a door. The next afternoon, he passed the laundry room and stopped. Lila sat on a low wooden bench near the back door, a white envelope in her hands. Sunlight poured in behind her, turning the edges of the paper into a small halo. She read the letter once, twice, then again, as if the words might disappear if she blinked too long. Everything all right? Adrian asked before he could stop himself. She looked up, eyes glassy. Yes, sir, her voice trembled. More than all right, and she held the letter out with both hands as though it were something holy. Malik's program. Someone paid the balance. The principal says this covers the rest of the year in supplies. She swallowed hard, breath catching. They didn't leave a name. Adrian kept his face neutral, schooling every muscle the way he did in front of reporters. That's good news, he said. Sounds like you found yourself a guardian angel. Her lips curved into a smile that was brighter than any chandelier in the house. I don't know who did it, she whispered, but God does. I'll be thanking him for them for a long time. He nodded once and stepped back, as if any closer, and she might somehow see straight through him. That night, he didn't pour whiskey. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at his own hands. They were steady again, finally. Not because the market was calm, not because a deal had closed, but because somewhere in Georgia, a boy with a gap-toothed smile could walk into Saturday classes without his mother checking her bank balance first. Adrian exhaled, long and slow. He glanced toward the window, where the city lights glittered like 1,000 distant altars. No priest, no chapel, no script. Just a man who'd spent a lifetime sneering at prayer, sitting alone in a dark room with his heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "This is ridiculous," he told the air. The air said nothing back. He scrubbed a hand over his face, then did something he would have laughed at himself for, even a week ago. He slid off the bed and knelt on the polished hardwood floor. It hurt. He wasn't built for this posture anymore. His knees protested, his back tensed, his hands hovered awkwardly in front of him. He felt foolish, vulnerable, exposed. "Look," he said, voice low and rough. "I don't know how any of this works." The house didn't answer. "I don't know if there's anybody on the other end of this." He let out an incredulous half laugh. "Honestly, if there is, I'm probably the last person you want to hear from." He swallowed. "But if you are there, whoever you are, I'm not asking anything for me." He thought of Lila, kneeling in that small room, hands folded over a worn Bible. Of Malik, standing in front of a cardboard model of the solar system, saying broken pieces add up again. "Just watch out for them," he whispered. "The woman praying in the room I almost turned into a mistake. The kid trying to put his world together with fractions and hope." He shook his head, annoyed with himself and the thickness in his throat. "And if no one's listening," he added quietly, "then fine. At least I said it." He stayed there for a long moment, knees aching, staring at the floor. Then he climbed back into bed, feeling strangely lighter and more exhausted at the same time. The next morning, he walked into the dining room and found Lila arranging flowers in a plain glass vase. Wildflowers from the edge of the property, not the expensive imported stems he'd grown used to. "They were growing near the road," she said when she noticed him watching. "Would have been run over by the delivery trucks by noon." "Rescuing things that don't know they need saving," he said dryly. "Seems on brand for you." She smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." He hesitated. The words sounded absurd in his head, but he said them anyway. "I tried praying last night," he said. She stilled, one flower still in her hand. "For what?" "For you," he replied, surprising himself with his own honesty. "And your son." Her eyes filled quickly, not with dramatic tears, but with something deeper. Gratitude thick enough to make her voice catch. "Every honest word counts," she said softly, "even the clumsy ones." He nodded, looked away, and somewhere between the wrong room he'd opened by accident and the quiet decision he'd made on his bedroom floor, a man who'd sworn off faith started to realize that maybe belief didn't begin with certainty. Maybe it began with caring about someone other than himself, and that, whether he was ready to admit it or not, was the most dangerous change of all. It started with something small, a missing cross. On Thursday afternoon, Lila pushed open the door to her room and knew instantly that something was wrong. The window was closed. She never left it that way. The whole point of that narrow sill, that little slice of sky, was that light could slip in, no matter how early or late her shift ended. Her gaze flew to the spot where the wooden cross usually rested. A simple thing, no bigger than her palm, carved long ago from a scrap of oak by the mother she'd buried before Malik turned 3. The sill was bare. Her stomach dropped. She checked the floor, the bed, under the thin mattress, inside the small drawer where she kept her folded uniforms. Nothing. By the time she stepped into the hallway, her breath had turned shallow. She stopped a younger maid passing with fresh towels. "Has anyone been in my room?" Lila asked. The girl shook her head. "Just Mrs. Brooks this morning when you left. I haven't seen anyone go in." Lila thanked her and walked away, the panic coiling tight beneath her ribs. It wasn't about the object itself. The cross wasn't worth anything to anyone else, just old wood and worn edges. But it was the last thing her mother had touched, the last thing that smelled of home when everything else had been boxed and sold. She found Adrian in the library pretending to read a quarterly report he clearly hadn't turned a page on in 20 minutes. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir," she said, hands clasped to hide the tremor. But something's gone missing. His attention sharpened. What? My cross. It was on the window in my room this morning. It's not there now. He stood up immediately. Did anyone go in? Not that I know of. He didn't ask any more questions. Wait here, he said, already striding past her. Minutes later, he pushed open the door to the security room. The technician swiveled in his chair, startled. I need the feed for the servants' hallway, Adrian said. Between 7 and 10 this morning. Focus on Ms. Brooks's door. The technician fumbled through the timestamps, then froze. On the grainy black and white feed, a figure appeared. Housekeeping uniform. Hair in a tight blonde bun. Lucy, one of the newer hires. She glanced up and down the hallway before slipping into Lila's room with a dustbin under her arm. Pause, Adrian ordered. They watched as Lucy walked to the window, looked at something, then quickly reached out and tucked a small object into the pocket of her apron. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Print that frame, he said. When he returned to the library, Lila was still standing near the shelves, hands pressed together as if holding herself still. He handed her the printed still. Lucy, she breathed. I'll handle it, Adrian said. Anger sat cold and clean in his veins now. Not the wild heat that had almost pushed her out a window, but a protective fury he'd never felt on anyone's behalf but his own. Lucy arrived in the small office off the kitchen, looking smug and nervous at the same time. You wanted to see me, Mr. Cole? He held up the photograph. Did you go into Miss Brooks' room this morning? She swallowed. I was just dusting. I thought it would be fine. Did you take anything from her window? It was just an old thing, Lucy blurted. A little wooden cross. I thought it was decoration. I didn't think she'd... It belonged to her mother, Adrian cut in, voice low enough to make her flinch. Return it. Now. Color drained from her face. She left and came back within a minute. The cross wrapped hastily in a napkin as if touching it barehanded might burn her. He didn't look at her again. You're done here, he said. Payroll will handle your last check. Security will escort you out. Lucy started to protest, but one look at his face shut her down. She left in a swirl of apologies that meant nothing. Outside in the hallway, Lila waited, silent. Adrian placed the napkin gently in her hands. She unfolded it like it was made of glass. When she saw the cross, her shoulders sagged in relief. She pressed it to her chest, eyes closing for a second as if anchoring herself to something solid in a world that had just shifted under her feet. I'm sorry, Adrian said, that anyone in my house thought they could take something like that from you. She looked up at him, eyes shining, but steady. Thank you for getting it back, she replied. I would have turned this place upside down, but I don't have access to cameras. He reached out on impulse, letting his fingers brush the worn wood still resting against her palm. It was smooth from years of being held. It's just a piece of wood, he murmured. It's memory, she answered, and promise. You still believe in people after this? He asked, genuinely baffled. She smiled softly. Even when they don't deserve it, I have to. Otherwise, I'd turn into the kind of person who steals from windows and thinks no one will notice. That sounds exhausting, he muttered. It's also freeing, she said. He watched her walk away, cross held carefully in her hand, and felt something unfamiliar prickle at the base of his throat. Reverence, his mind supplied. A word he'd only ever used for architecture and market moves. The house exhaled after Lucy left. Staff moved more easily. Conversations in the kitchen started to sound less rehearsed. The air felt lighter, which is why, when the next storm rolled in, everyone sensed it before the first car even reached the gate. It came on leather heels and red lipstick. Victoria Hale arrived on a Friday afternoon without warning, dragging expensive luggage and old ghosts behind her. The estate manager received the call first, voice tight as he relayed the message. Ms. Hale will be staying the week. Please prepare the master suite. She prefers sparkling water, no ice, and white orchids in her bathroom. Lila heard the name in passing and saw its effect in the way shoulders tensed, in the way younger maids whispered in corners. She didn't know the full story, but she knew enough. Ex-fiancé, high society, the kind of woman who treated staff like wallpaper. By the time the sleek black sedan glided to a stop in the circular driveway, the foyer gleamed. Chandeliers were polished, fresh lilies arranged, the flowers Adrian hated but tolerated for appearances on certain occasions. He came down the staircase as the driver opened the car door. Victoria stepped out like she was emerging from a magazine spread, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, blonde hair perfectly arranged, dress hugging a body sculpted by wealth and discipline. Adrian, she drawled, pulling off her glasses and offering an air kiss near his cheek without touching him. You're still brooding in palaces, I see. Victoria, he replied, expression giving away nothing. Still arriving unannounced, I see. She laughed, linking her arm through his like it was the most natural thing in the world. You love that about me. He didn't answer. Her gaze swept the foyer and caught on Lila, who stood near the console table with a dustcloth in hand. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. And who is this? Victoria asked, smile thin and sharp. This is Ms. Brooks, Adrian said evenly. She runs the house. How quaint, Victoria murmured. A maid with authority. Easier to respect authority when it actually works, Adrian replied. Lila keeps this place running better than any of those managers you insisted I hire. Lila felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her face neutral. Good afternoon, ma'am, she said. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. We'll see if it stays that way, dear. Later that evening, a note appeared on top of Lila's folded uniform, written in looping cursive on heavy cream stationery. Join me for tea in the solarium, 11 Hackshire sharp. Wear something less industrial. VH. Lila stared at the paper for a long moment. She had no desire to play someone else's game, but refusing outright would create a different kind of tension she didn't want for the staff. At 10:59, she stepped into the glass-walled room at the back of the house, wearing a simple cream blouse and dark trousers instead of her navy uniform. Her hair was pulled back in its usual bun. No performance, no armor, just herself. Victoria lounged in a chaise near the window, teacup in hand, every movement choreographed. Ms. Brooks, she said, smiling like she'd just discovered something amusing. You clean up nicely. I didn't realize I was dirty, Lila replied calmly, taking the seat opposite when gestured to. Victoria stirred her tea with slow, exaggerated motions, letting the spoon clink against the porcelain. I'll be frank, she said finally. I find it interesting how much influence you seem to have acquired. People listen when you speak. Adrian mentions you. Her lips curled. That's not normal. Everyone here has a job, Lila said. I just do mine. Oh no, Victoria replied. You've done more than that. You've managed to soften him. That man was steel when I met him. Efficient, untouchable. She leaned forward. Now he invites the help to sit at his table. He goes on walks. He rejects perfectly good marriage matches. Her eyes narrowed. What exactly have you done to him? Lila felt the old instinct to shrink back, to apologize for taking up space that had never been meant for her. She pushed it down. If he's changing, she said, it's because he chose to. Victoria laughed, a sound like glass breaking. Men like Adrian don't change without a reason, and reasons can be removed. There it was. If you brought me here to scare me, Lila said, you'll have to work harder. Oh, I'm not trying to frighten you, Victoria said, standing and walking to the window. I actually admire you. You've managed something even I couldn't do. Get under his skin. She turned, eyes gleaming. But understand something, Ms. Brooks. You are not permanent. Men like Adrian, they return to their patterns, to their own kind. When that happens, I'd hate for you to be surprised when the door closes behind you. Lila rose, smoothing her blouse. If a door closes, she said quietly, I'll build another one. I've had practice. Hot. She walked out without waiting to be dismissed. What she didn't know was that someone else had been listening earlier that day. Noah, Adrian's 7-year-old nephew, had claimed the heavy velvet curtains in the reading room as his favorite hiding place. The boy rarely spoke, rarely looked people in the eye, but he watched everything. Curled behind the drapes with one of Adrian's old dictaphones in his small hands, Noah had pressed record when Victoria walked in on a call. I told you, her voice crackled through the little device, low and sharp. He's gone soft. This housekeeper, Lila, has him convinced he's some kind of savior. Give it a month. I'll have the story ready. Billionaire manipulated by Maid. The press will eat it up. He hates being embarrassed in public. Once that happens, he won't touch her again. Noah didn't understand all the words, but he understood enough. Hurt her. Later, while Lila trimmed the rose bushes in the side garden, she felt a small tug at her sleeve. "Noah," she said, smiling, "you're supposed to be with your tutor." He didn't speak. He just pressed the dictaphone into her hand and touched his chest where his heart was, a gesture he used when something was important. She frowned, pressed play, and felt her blood go cold. By the time the recording ended, her hands were shaking, not from fear, from fury held in check. "You heard this?" she asked. Noah nodded. "You recorded it?" Another nod. She dropped to her knees and pulled him into a hug so tight she felt his small body relax against her, instead of stiffening. "You're braver than most grown men I know," she whispered. "Thank you." Adrian was in his office when she walked in without knocking, pressing play before he could even ask what was wrong. Victoria's voice filled the room, slick and poisonous. Every calculated word, every plan to turn kindness into a scandal, spilled into the air between them. When the recording clicked off, the silence felt heavier than concrete. Adrian's face had gone pale, but his eyes were burning. "She said that," he said slowly. "In my house." Lila nodded. "Every word." Noah recorded it. A flicker of pride cut through his anger. "Noah." "He saw what she was," Lila said simply, "and wanted to protect us." Adrian pushed back his chair. "I'll have security throw her out right now." "No!" The single word stopped him mid-stride. "Don't give her the drama she wants," Lila said. "People like her thrive on scenes." "What do you suggest?" he asked. "We let her show everyone exactly who she is," Lila replied. "In your world, at your table. Then you cut her off so cleanly she can't pretend she slipped." He stared at her, something like awe simmering beneath his anger. "All you have to do," she finished, "is invite her to dinner." That night, the dining room glowed with warm light. The table was set for 3. Victoria swept in wearing a dress that could fund a small charity, lips painted the color of expensive sin. "Intimate," she said, eyeing the place settings. "Just the way I like it." "Sit," Adrian said. Lila came in a moment later, not in her uniform, but in a plain black dress and soft cardigan, neither apologizing for her presence nor flaunting it. She took her seat without waiting for permission. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Is this some kind of experiment?" "No," Lila said quietly. "This is clarity." Halfway through the soup course, Adrian set his spoon down and placed the dictaphone gently in the middle of the table. "What's that?" Victoria asked. "Truth," he said. "Play it, Lila." Victoria's laughter died on her lips as her own voice spilled into the candlelight. "He's gone soft, manipulated by a maid. The press will eat it up." By the time the recording ended, her face had drained of color. "This is illegal," she hissed. "Recording me without my consent." "No," Adrian said, standing slowly. "What's illegal is the smear campaign you just confessed to, on my property, targeting someone under my protection." "You're being manipulated," she snapped, turning on Lila. "Can't you see what she's doing to you?" "Finish that sentence," he warned, "and I will make sure every board you sit on hears this tape before the weekend is over." She shut her mouth with an audible click. "You have 30 minutes to pack," Adrian said, voice calm in a way that scared her more than shouting ever would. "Security will escort you off my land. You will not contact me, my staff, or any member of my family again." "Adrian, be reasonable." "I'm being more reasonable than you deserve," he replied. "You thought you could weaponize the woman who keeps this house standing. You miscalculated." Victoria's eyes blazed. "She's just a—" "Say it," Lila murmured. "Just once. Out loud. For yourself." Victoria swallowed whatever slur had been climbing her tongue. She stormed out instead, heels striking the marble like tiny explosions. The house seemed to physically relax when the front door slammed. Adrian turned back to Lila, the anger draining from his face, leaving something raw in its place. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You don't owe me anything," she replied. "Noah's the one who saved us." "You trusted him," Adrian said, "and you trusted me with the truth." She held his gaze. "For a long time, this house only heard deals and arguments and orders. It needed to hear someone finally say no." He looked at her then the way a man looks at a miracle he doesn't feel worthy of. "Stay upstairs tonight," he blurted, then winced at his own phrasing. "I don't mean, I just," he exhaled. "I don't want you walking those corridors alone while the echo of her is still in the walls." Surely. Lila shook her head, a small smile touching her lips. "Not like this," she said gently. "Not while you're still angry. When the anger quiets, we can talk." He nodded, almost relieved that she'd drawn lines he hadn't been strong enough to draw for himself before. Later, as she placed her mother's cross back on the windowsill, the house finally felt less like a cage and more like something else. Something that still carried cracks and scars, yes, but also something that might one day be called home. Sunday mornings used to be just another workday for Adrian Cole. A head start, a quiet inbox, meetings with people in different time zones who thought time off was for the weak. This Sunday, he found himself standing at the wrought iron gate at the end of his driveway, hands resting on the cool metal, watching the sky slowly bleed from indigo to gold. He hadn't planned to be there. He'd simply woken up before dawn with his mind roaring and his chest oddly still, the kind of quiet that came after a storm when you walk outside and realize the tree is still standing. Gravel crunched behind him. "You're up early," Lila said, stepping onto the lane from the side garden. She wore her uniform under a long beige coat, curls tucked under a knitted hat. A small Bible rested in her hand, edges frayed. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. "Apparently that's my new hobby." She smiled faintly, looking toward the horizon. "My grandmother used to say God paints most of his best work while we're not looking." "That sounds like something a grandmother would say," he muttered. "It was," she said. They stood side by side in companionable silence. The road beyond the gate stretched out under an archway of trees, leaves glowing at the edges where the light found them. Somewhere far off, a bird called once, then fell quiet. "Where are you headed?" he asked finally, nodding at the Bible. "There's a little church about a mile down," she said. "White building, squeaky steps, sings off key." A warm fondness laced her tone. "I go when my shift allows." "You walk?" "It's not far," she said, "and it's the only time I hear my thoughts without someone needing something from me." He hesitated. The Adrian from a month ago would have scoffed, suggested she take the car, called it a waste of time. The Adrian standing at the gate thought of a woman praying in a small room, of a cross returned, of a boy with a recording device held out like a shield. "I'll walk you," he heard himself say. She looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "I want to." They walked in step down the quiet road. Adrian's phone stayed in his pocket, screen dark. Lila's hand brushed the Bible's worn spine occasionally, like someone checking a familiar worry stone was still there. "I'm not saying I suddenly believe," Adrian said after a while, staring straight ahead. "I'm not there." She didn't rush to fill the silence. "But the other night," he continued, "when I knelt in that ridiculous room with the stupid expensive rug, I said some things. For you, for Malik, for Noah. And?" she asked gently. "And I didn't feel lightning," he said dryly, "or hear a voice. But for the first time in a long time, I heard myself." "Sometimes that's where faith starts," Lila replied. "With honesty, not answers." The chapel appeared around a bend, small, wooden, paint peeling in places, steeple modest against the growing light. The front steps creaked when they climbed them. "I can sit in the back," he said. "If you'd rather." "I'd rather you sit wherever you can breathe," she answered. Front back doorway. God doesn't take attendance by row. He chose the last pew, leaning into the shadows where he felt safest. She moved toward the middle, greeting a few familiar faces. A woman with tired hands, an older man with a cane, two children sharing a coloring book. The service was simple. A few songs led by a man with a guitar who missed chords but not sincerity. A message about mercy from a pastor whose own suit had seen too many funerals. Adrian didn't understand half the theology, and he distrusted the other half on principle. But he kept finding his eyes drawn not to the pulpit, but to Lila. Head bowed in prayer, eyes closed during songs, lips moving when the pastor talked about forgiveness. Not for show, but like someone reading a language they knew by heart. At the end, the pastor invited anyone who wanted prayer to come forward. Adrian stayed seated. His instinct was to remain in control, even of his own discomfort. Lila turned anyway, walked back, and held a hand out. She didn't tug, didn't push. "Walk with me," she said simply. His legs moved before his fear caught up. "What would you like me to pray for, son?" the pastor asked, resting a weathered hand on his shoulder. Adrian swallowed. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm not sure what I believe." The pastor smiled. "That's a good place to start." He prayed anyway, words about healing and courage and second chances flowing over Adrian like water he hadn't realized he was thirsty for. It didn't break him. It steadied him, like someone had quietly moved one more weight off his spine. On the walk back, the silence between him and Lila felt different, less charged, more chosen. "Thank you," he said at last. "For what?" "For not letting me bolt," he said. "For standing next to me in rooms I don't understand yet." "That's what grace does," she said. "It walks with you, not ahead of you." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't. Days later, after everything with Victoria had settled like dust, after the staff stopped glancing nervously at every door, after Noah began quietly drifting toward Lila whenever she entered a room, Adrian did something else he'd never done. He invited them both away. "There's a cabin 2 hours north," he said one evening, standing in the doorway of Lila's room like a man asking for more than he knew how to name. "In the woods. No staff. No cameras. No board calls." She arched a brow. "You want to run away?" "I want to step out," he corrected. "Just for a few days. You, me, Noah. Somewhere that doesn't remember every version of me I'm trying to forget." "You know this sounds dangerously close to a vacation," she teased softly. "It's not a vacation," he said. "It's a reset." "I have responsibilities here," she reminded him. "I can cover them," he replied. "I own too many people's time. I can free some of yours." "Let me think about it," she said. When he left, Noah, who'd been curled in the corner with a coloring book, looked up. He walked over, tugged Lila's sleeve, and whispered a single word he'd barely used at all before. "Go!" She froze, heart tripping. "You think so?" she asked. He nodded, solemn and sure. That was how she found herself 3 days later, stepping out of an SUV into air that smelled like pine and rain instead of polish and money. The cabin rose from the trees in solid lines of stone and wood, big but not showy, like whoever built it had wanted to disappear without quite vanishing. "No cell service," Adrian said almost proudly, holding up his silent phone as Noah darted toward a stand of trees, fascinated by every rock and branch. "I have to drive 10 minutes down the road just to get 2 bars." "That sounds like my aunt's idea of paradise," Lila replied. He watched as she walked into the cabin, fingers trailing over the back of a worn couch, the edge of a bookshelf stacked with actual paperbacks instead of awards. "This is where I come when everything breaks," he said quietly. The first time was after the funeral, then after a bad acquisition, then after other mistakes. "And now?" she asked, turning to face him. "Now I'm here before everything breaks," he said. "I'm trying something new." That night they sat by the stone fireplace, Noah on the rug piecing together a puzzle of a wolf under the moon. Lila held a mug of tea between her hands like it was a small miracle. Adrian watched them both, feeling more human than he had in years. "When I was 10, Lila said suddenly, eyes on the flames, "my father said he was going to the store. He never came back." Adrian looked at her, really looked. "My mother kept his chair at the table for years," she continued, "set a plate for him every Sunday, waited for knocks that were never him, phone calls that were never his voice. I watched her wait herself empty." "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate but true. "Don't be," she replied. "I learned something from it. You can't stop people from leaving, but you can decide whether their leaving hollows you out or pushes your roots deeper." "You chose roots," he said. "I chose to stay soft," she corrected, "even when the world told me softness gets you broken." Adrian stared at the fire. "I think I chose hollow," he admitted. "You chose armor," she said. "Hollow is what happens when the armor grows heavier than what it was protecting." They fell silent, watching Noah line up the last pieces of the wolf. He yawned, leaned against Lila's side, and fell asleep without ceremony. She pulled a blanket over him and smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," Adrian said, the words slipping out without permission. It's not about deserving, she reminded him gently. It never is. Not with God. Not with people who really love you. The word love hung between them like something fragile and blazing. They didn't kiss. Not that night. But the distance that had once been filled with status and fear and unspoken rules had been replaced by something else. Mutual choosing. Not of positions or roles. Of each other. When they returned to the mansion 3 days later, reality hit quick. An envelope waited in the foyer, heavy paper, expensive seal, addressed not to Adrian, but to Lila, the Carson Foundation. She opened it with careful fingers. The letter was polite in the way knives were polished. Cold, professional, cruel. We are aware of your association with Mr. Cole. Given the sensitivity of his position, we strongly advise that you refrain from attending our upcoming charity gala. Maintaining the grant image benefits everyone involved. No signature, just a printed name. Adrian read it over her shoulder. Cowards, he muttered. Who are they? She asked. Old money, he said. Old rules. They tolerated me because I made them richer. Now they're nervous because I brought someone into the room they can't control. Because of me, she said. Because of you, he agreed. And because I'm finally doing something they can't predict. You can just let it go, she said. I don't need a gala. I've lived my whole life without one. I can't let it go, he replied, because if I do, they'll send this letter to the next woman who doesn't fit their mold. And the next. Someone has to be the line they don't cross. 2 days later, an invitation arrived for him. Same foundation, same event. His name in gold at the top. He wrote his response in 5 words. I'll attend. So will she. The ballroom was everything you'd expect. Crystal, crystal, and more crystal. Strings of light. Gowns that cost as much as cars. Laughter with too many teeth in it. Conversation stilled when Adrian walked in. They went utterly silent when they saw the woman on his arm. Lila wore an emerald dress that hugged her frame without screaming for attention. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, curls catching the chandelier glow. No diamonds, just the simple cross hanging from a thin chain at her throat. The one that had once sat on a cracked windowsill. She doesn't belong here, someone whispered. As if any of us really do, Lila thought, but she just lifted her chin and kept walking. You look like a revolution they didn't see coming, Adrian murmured at her ear. I'm not here for them, she replied. I'm here because you asked me to stand beside you. A Carson representative took the stage later, voice smooth, thanking donors, praising legacies. When he reached Adrian's name, he hesitated, as if reconsidering. We're honored to have Mr. Adrian Cole with us this evening, he said finally, and his, guest. Polite applause. When it was time for key benefactors to say a few words, Adrian stepped up to the microphone. He hadn't prepared a speech. He didn't need one. Most of you know me, he began. You know my companies, my numbers, the headlines. A low murmur of acknowledgement rolled through the room. What you don't know, he continued, is that for years my life was built like this ballroom, expensive, fragile, and designed to hide the cracks. A few tight smiles faltered. It took someone you tried to keep out of this room, he went on, glancing at Leila, to show me that the most valuable person in my house wasn't on a guest list. She was changing sheets, folding laundry, and praying for a family that never said thank you. The silence sharpened. When a letter arrived telling her she would damage my image if she stood beside me tonight, I realized something. He let the words fall slowly. If my image can't survive standing next to the woman who taught me how to be human again, then it's not worth protecting. He stepped back from the mic. No applause, not at first, just stunned, quiet. Then from the back, someone clapped once. Then again. A few more joined. The claps were scattered, hesitant, but they were there. Later, on the balcony outside their suite, the city lights stretching below like a shattered mirror, Lila wrapped her robe tighter against the night air. There are headlines already, Adrian said, handing her a mug of tea. Some investors are concerned. A few board members have hinted at stepping down. Are you afraid, she asked. Terrified, he said honestly, and more awake than I've felt in years. She smiled, leaning her shoulder against his. Me too. Weeks passed. The mansion didn't go back to what it had been. It couldn't. Lila no longer slept in the small servants' room at the end of the narrow hall. Adrian had offered her another space, larger, with sun pouring in through big windows and shelves for Malik's drawings when he visited. She still carried trays when she wanted to, still helped in the kitchen on Sundays, still mended tears in Noah's sweaters. But her role had shifted from invisible support beam to something else, center of gravity. She sat in on certain meetings now, quietly listening as Adrian laid out proposals. Once, when a partner suggested cutting staff benefits to boost margins, Adrian glanced at her. She didn't say a word, just raised an eyebrow. "That's not how we're going to do this," Adrian said firmly. "Find another way." On the first anniversary of her hiring, though no one called it that anymore, they held a small gathering. Not a gala, just family, staff, a few friends who'd earned the right to see this version of him. No speeches, no toasts, just laughter in a house that had once known mostly silence and strained politeness. At one point, Noah tugged at Lila's hand and dragged her to the piano. "I don't play," she protested. He sat, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to press his own. Simple chords, slow and searching. She followed his lead, stumbling at first, then finding the pattern. The room felt quiet, not out of obligation, but reverence. Adrian watched them. This woman who had knelt in a small room he'd never meant to see. This boy who had once hidden behind curtains and recorded the truth no one else was brave enough to expose. This unlikely small congregation that had somehow turned his house into something like a church, without him ever planning it. Later, he stood at the window of what was now their shared room. 2 toothbrushes, 2 pairs of shoes by the door, 1 cross on the sill where the light always found it. Lila came up beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about that first morning?" she asked softly. "When you opened the wrong door and yelled at a woman on her knees?" He winced. "I think about it every day." "I don't," she said. He turned, surprised. "I think about what came after," she continued. "A man who grabbed my arm before I fell, who paid for a boy's classes and never intended to be thanked, who listened outside a thin door to prayers he didn't believe in yet, who walked me to a church, to a cabin, to a ballroom full of people who wanted me gone and chose me anyway." He swallowed hard. "I thought that room was the wrong one," he admitted. "A mistake. A door I'd meant to bypass." She smiled, lifting her hand to rest over his heart. "No," she said. "It was exactly where you were supposed to be." Outside, the city hummed, oblivious. Inside, in a house that had once prided itself on silence, there was now laughter, music, and the soft murmur of prayers whispered at opposite windows that had somehow begun to align. Sometimes the biggest changes don't come from grand gestures or perfect plans. Sometimes they start with a man in a hurry, a wrong handle turned, a sharp word thrown into a room that was never meant for him, and a black maid who refused to let his worst moment be the last truth about him. Lila's quiet strength, Noah's silent courage, Malik's stubborn hope from miles away. Adrian's halting, clumsy willingness to change. Together, they rewrote the story of a house built on power and turned it into a home built on something far more difficult and far more beautiful. Seeing people as they truly are, choosing them anyway. And finally, after a long time of holding everything tight, learning how to let the light in.